Danger doesn't just live in stories, it finds you in the places you trust most. A road trip, a foreign city, a summer camp cabin. Each begins ordinary, then twists into a nightmare. These are the moments when safety disappears, when eyes find you in the dark, and when you realize you've been seen. The Plateau. Marcus recalled a terrifying incident that ruined what was supposed to be the best summer of his life. Just a couple of weeks after graduating high school, Marcus was hoping for the most unforgettable summer of his life. He had no responsibilities, no job, no classes, just 3 months of pure freedom. The plan was to live it up before reality set in, and a popular rite of passage for new graduates in his area of Wyoming was to drive out into the high plateaus for some rock climbing. Marcus, along with his friends Alexandra, Nick, and Jack, had been planning the trip for weeks. Alexandra was the group's unofficial leader. She was the only one with a car reliable enough for the drive a beat-up but beloved Jeep that she used for off-roading every chance she got. She was also the designated driver since she didn't drink, which meant the guys could pack a few beers to celebrate once they reached the top of a plateau. Their plan was to drive out to the Flaming Gorge lookout, take in the views, then find a good spot to climb on the way back. The lookout was incredible. The vast, rugged landscape stretched out for miles, and the group spent about an hour just taking pictures and soaking in the view. They started heading back toward Route 80, keeping an eye out for potential climbing spots. As they drove along Highway 141, they spotted a really cool area off the side of the road. Massive rock formations rose from the ground, looking perfect for a climb, challenging enough to be fun, but not so technical that they needed ropes or harnesses. Alexandra pulled the Jeep into a small gravel lot near the base of the rock face, and they all grabbed their gear. The plateau they chose was maybe a 15-minute climb to the top, a simple scramble with plenty of handholds and footholds. Alex, the most experienced climber, went first, followed by Marcus, then Nick, with Jack bringing up the rear. The view from the top was absolutely worth it. You could see for miles in every direction, just endless stretches of Wyoming wilderness. They cracked open their beers, talking about school and their plans for the future. Marcus was just quietly admiring the scenery when a red pickup truck came speeding down the highway below. He didn't think much of it until the truck screeched to a halt right in the middle of the highway. The four friends watched as it began reversing, slowly backing up until it was directly across from their little gravel lot. It then turned off the highway and pulled into the lot, parking a few feet away from Alexandra's Jeep. The friends watched as a man got out of the truck. He was tall, with a strong build, but from their vantage point, they couldn't make out any details. At first, they thought maybe he was another climber or a hiker looking for a spot to rest. But then, he started walking around the Jeep, peering into the windows and trying the door handles. His movements were deliberate, almost predatory, and it was immediately clear that he was not there to climb. Nick yelled down from the top of the plateau, a loud, "Hey!" that echoed across the rocks, hoping to announce their presence and scare the man off. The guy jumped, clearly startled, and began looking around, confused. He finally spotted the four teenagers perched on top of the plateau, and to their surprise, simply waved at them. For a moment, they thought that was the end of it. Maybe he was just a curious hiker who was going to get back in his truck and leave. But he didn't. He continued to circle the Jeep. Jack, without thinking, yelled down, "We're armed!" It was a complete bluff, and Marcus immediately thought it was a terrible idea. They had no weapons, but Jack was hoping the threat would be enough. It wasn't. The man looked up at them again and yelled something back that made Marcus' blood run cold. "Me too, kiddo." Then he held something up in the air and waved it. Even from that distance, Marcus could tell it was a gun. What happened next was like something out of a nightmare. The man started ramming his shoulder and elbow into the Jeep's windows, trying to break the glass. The sound of the impacts was audible from the top of the plateau. Alexandra was furious and started screaming at him to get away from her car. The rest of them joined in, yelling and making as much noise as possible while they began scrambling down the plateau as quickly as they safely could. It was a chaotic and terrifying descent. They heard the sound of glass shattering just as they reached the ground. Sprinting across the lot toward the Jeep, they heard the man yell, "Stop!" and saw him pointing the gun directly at them. They froze, hands slowly rising into the air. He was close enough now that Marcus could get a good look at his face. He was an older white guy, probably in his 50s, with a scraggly beard and weathered features, nothing particularly distinctive, which made the whole thing even more frustrating. He ordered them to throw their phones and wallets on the ground, which they did without hesitation. He then told them to walk backward while he collected their belongings, keeping the gun trained on them the entire time. After scooping up their stuff, he pulled out a knife and deliberately punctured one of the Jeep's tires. With a final chilling glance, he walked back to his red pickup, which Marcus noticed had no license plates, and drove off without another word. Alex was livid, and Marcus couldn't blame her. They were robbed, the Jeep was disabled, and they had no way to call the police. Jack and Marcus changed the tire as fast as they could, but they all knew the guy was long gone. They managed to make it back to town using Nick's knowledge of the area, and as soon as they got to Alex's house, they called the police. They gave a description of the man in his truck, but without a license plate or any other identifying information, there wasn't much the police could do. They never heard anything back, and as far as Marcus knows, the guy was never caught. The incident completely ruined what should have been one of the best days of their summer. For months, none of them felt safe going out to remote areas like that again. The unsettling feeling that this could happen to anyone, at any time, lingered long after the immediate danger had passed. Escape from Rijeka. This happened 5 years ago. 5 summers ago, to be exact. Justin's girlfriend at the time, let's just call her PS, had just graduated from college, with Justin having graduated a year earlier. They aren't together anymore, but there's no bad blood between them, and Justin doesn't regret a single bit of their relationship, even though it eventually fell apart. She was mixed, half Croatian and half Brazilian, and the two of them had always talked about going on a European trip together after finishing college. If there's one thing you should know about PS, it's that if she put her mind to something, she was going to stop at nothing to see it through. Call it the Latin blood that was always the joke Justin made. That's just how she was. So as soon as she graduated, they started planning the summer vacation they had always fantasized about. There was one glaring issue, though. They were both painfully broke, so they'd have to cheap it. The itinerary they ended up settling on was pretty ambitious for 2 people on a shoestring budget. They would spend a week in Croatia, finishing up with 2 nights in Rijeka, which was PS's grandparents' hometown. She had never been there before, but she'd grown up hearing stories about it from her grandmother, and Justin could tell she was excited to see where her family came from. Because they were trying to save every possible cent, they couldn't afford any of the nice hotels or even decent hostels. Instead, they ended up booking the cheapest Airbnbs and travel lodges they could find on short notice places, with 1-star reviews and photos that looked like they were taken with a flip phone. But they didn't care. They were just happy to be going. Zagreb and Dubrovnik were incredible, even on their tight budget. The cities were packed with tourists, which made it easy to blend in and find cheap food and free activities. Rijeka, however, was different. It's a port city on the northern coast, and while it's technically on the water, is not exactly what you'd call a beach destination. More importantly, it definitely wasn't a popular tourist spot. Walking around, Justin and PS were clearly some of the only foreigners in the entire town. That should have been their first red flag, but honestly, they kinda loved it. PS spoke decent Croatian, not fluent, but enough to get by, and Justin was picking up bits and pieces as they went. They spent their first day just wandering around talking to locals, soaking up the authentic Croatian experience they couldn't get in the touristy cities. PS was one of those people who could strike up a conversation with anyone, and Justin was pretty talkative himself, so they were having a blast chatting with shopkeepers and random people on the street. Everyone seemed friendly enough, though Justin noticed they were getting some lingering stares. Not the usual curious looks tourists get. These felt different, more intense. But PS didn't seem bothered by it, so Justin figured he was just being paranoid. On their second day, they decided to venture a little further from the city center to find somewhere authentic to eat lunch. PS had heard about a small restaurant area from someone at their Airbnb. Nothing fancy, just a local spot that supposedly had amazing seafood. It was maybe a 15-minute walk from downtown through residential streets that grew increasingly quiet as they got further from the main area. The restaurant itself was pretty nondescript, just a small building with a handful of tables inside and a simple handwritten menu taped to the window. But the moment they walked in, Justin knew PS had been right about the food. The smell was incredible, fresh and homemade. They sat down near the window and ordered way too much food: grilled fish, seafood pasta, bread, and a bottle of local wine that cost about €3. Justin thought they'd struck gold. The food was fantastic, better than anything they'd had in the touristy restaurants, and it was costing them practically nothing. At one point, Justin noticed a group of 5 men come in and sit 2 tables away. They looked rough, the kind of guys you'd cross the street to avoid, but they were just eating, not paying attention to him or PS as far as he could tell. Justin was actually kind of surprised he hadn't noticed the men earlier. He figured he'd just been too distracted by how good the food was, or too consumed in the conversation with his girlfriend. He didn't think much of it and went back to eating, though he did find it a bit annoying how loudly they were talking. They were about halfway through their meal, just talking and enjoying themselves, when PS suddenly went quiet. She was looking past Justin toward the back of the restaurant, toward those men, and he could tell something had shifted in her expression. Before he could ask what was wrong, she leaned across the table and said very quietly that they needed to leave right now. Justin whispered back, asking what she meant, but she was already reaching for her purse. She said she was serious, and there was something in her voice that told him he'd better listen. He still didn't understand what was happening, but she wasn't the type to panic over nothing. She spoke the language. She knew the culture better than he did. If she said they needed to get out of there was probably a good reason. Justin pulled out a handful of kuna bills and tossed them on the table, far more than the meal had cost, and followed her toward the door. The whole time, he expected her to explain, but she just kept walking faster, practically pulling him along by the arm. It wasn't until they were outside that he finally demanded to know what was going on. She looked back toward the restaurant and said she'd heard those men talking. They were discussing what they were going to do to them, to her specifically. Her voice was shaking a little, which scared Justin more than anything else. She said she'd heard them say they would separate the 2 first and that some guy named Luca would know what to do. She mentioned other things she didn't want to repeat, but the message was crystal clear. They needed to get back to the main part of town as quickly as possible. Justin told her they might have been joking, but she shook her head. They weren't talking about things they wanted to do. They were talking about things they were going to do. She said it sounded routine, not fantasy. He believed her. That's when Justin made the mistake of looking back toward the restaurant. All 5 men were standing outside now, watching them openly. The moment they saw him glance their way, they started walking in their direction. Justin grabbed PS's hand and told her they were following. Without another word, they both started running. Not jogging, not walking fast full-on, sprinting back toward the city center. The problem was, they were much farther from downtown than Justin had realized, and the streets between them and safety were mostly empty residential blocks. He could hear footsteps behind them, and when he glanced back, all 5 men were chasing. They weren't pretending anymore. They were outright pursuing them through the streets. It was downright terrifying. PS was in better shape than Justin, but somehow, he managed to keep up, probably thanks to adrenaline. They ran for what felt like forever, turning down random streets, hoping they were heading the right way. Finally, after maybe 10 minutes of the most intense running of Justin's life, they started seeing other people on the sidewalks and hearing traffic. The men stopped chasing as soon as the couple reached the busy area. When Justin looked back one more time, he saw them standing 2 blocks behind, watching but not coming any closer. It was as if they knew they couldn't do whatever they'd been planning once there were witnesses around. Both of them were completely out of breath and shaking from adrenaline. PS was crying a little, though she tried to hide it. Justin had never seen her that scared before, and it made the whole thing feel even more real. They found a cafe in the main square and sat down, trying to process what had just happened. That's when an older Croatian man at the next table, who must have overheard them speaking English, leaned over and asked if they were okay. When they explained, he just shook his head and called them idiots. Not cruelly, but like he couldn't believe how naive they had been. He said, Tourists shouldn't wander around alone in that part of the city, especially not obvious foreigners like them. Then PS described the restaurant they had gone to, and the man's expression grew even more serious. What he told them made Justin feel dizzy. He said they had basically walked into a known hangout for local criminals, a place connected to organized crime in the area. The man seemed genuinely concerned for them, as if they had narrowly avoided something terrible. Justin mentioned contacting local authorities, but the man just laughed and didn't elaborate. Then he paid for his coffee and promptly left. P.S. And Justin didn't linger much longer either. After catching their breath, they went straight back to their Airbnb. The rest of their trip was ruined. They were too shaken to leave except to grab food near the city center. They spent their last day inside, watching TV on Justin's laptop and counting down the hours until their flight. Looking back, Justin felt incredibly grateful that P.S. had the presence of mind to get them out of there when she did. If she hadn't understood what those men were saying, or if she had hesitated even a little, he didn't know what might have happened. It was one of those experiences that shows how quickly a normal day can turn into something genuinely dangerous, especially in an unfamiliar place. Justin still felt stupid for being so casual in a foreign country. He knew that was one of the most dangerous things you could do, especially when you looked nothing like a local. They didn't talk much about the incident once they got home, but Justin knew it affected both of them. P.S. had always been fearless about traveling and exploring new places, but he was certain that day in Rijeka had changed her because it certainly changed him. The red-capped woman. When Alex was just 13, they went to a summer camp for the first and last time. The camp was a traditional, rustic kind of place, located in a remote, wooded area. It was an old place with a lot of history, though the only thing the counselors ever mentioned about its past was a simple, unsettling detail. An old woman who used to work in the cafeteria, a woman named Ms. Graham, had died on the grounds a few years back. The official cause of death was never publicly disclosed, which just made the whole thing feel more sinister. It was one of those small, seemingly insignificant details you hear, and then promptly forget. That is, until one night. Alex was in a small cabin with a bunch of other teenagers. The cabin was arranged with a few rows of creaky, uncomfortable cots. It was a full moon, and the light was so bright it streamed through every window, illuminating the room with a pale, ethereal glow. Everyone else in the cabin was dead asleep, but for whatever reason, Alex's brain was wide awake. They lay there for what felt like hours, tossing and turning, trying to find a comfortable position on the lumpy mattress. After a while, they just gave up, feeling a wave of defeat wash over them. Sitting up, Alex rubbed their eyes and glanced around the silent room. As they did, they noticed something strange about the window directly across from their cot. The beam of moonlight that had been pouring through it was now completely blocked. Alex tilted their head, trying to figure out what was causing the shadow. Then they gasped, a small, involuntary sound that thankfully didn't wake anyone. Blocking the light was a person's head. It was an older woman with a red cap on, peering into the cabin from outside. For a moment, Alex's mind just went blank. They couldn't process it. What the hell is this lady doing? They thought. Didn't make any sense. The cabins were locked at night, and what kind of person would be out wandering around in the middle of the night just staring into a cabin full of sleeping kids? The full weight of the situation hit them a second later, when they realized the woman wasn't just looking into the room. She was looking directly at Alex. Her eyes were locked onto theirs, and Alex could feel the weight of that stare even from a distance. A surge of pure panic shot through Alex's body. Without thinking, they flopped onto their side, burying their face in the pillow. They squeezed their eyes shut and pretended to be asleep, though they knew it was a useless effort. They felt more like a kid hiding under the covers, hoping the monster would just go away. They lay there for what felt like an eternity, counting the seconds, their heart pounding against their ribs. After a full minute, the silence felt unbearable. The curiosity, mixed with dread, was too much. Alex slowly, cautiously, peeked back towards the window. She was gone. The moonlight once again streamed through the pane of glass. and there was nothing but the dark forest outside. Alex let out a shaky sigh of relief, the tension draining from their shoulders. The room still felt unsettling, but at least the immediate threat seemed to have vanished. Then, they noticed something else. The room seemed darker now, the shadows deeper than before. Something felt profoundly wrong. Alex's eyes scanned the room, and then they looked up. Right above their cot, a mere 3 feet away from their head, was another window. And staring straight down at them, a small wrinkled face with a red cap on, was the same woman. Her eyes were wide, her gaze fixed and unblinking. The glass was so close that the moonlight reflected off it, making her eyes appear like twin glowing orbs. This time, Alex didn't even try to pretend. They instantly recoiled, pulling the blankets up over their head, burying themselves completely in the suffocating darkness of their bed. They cowered there, a 13-year-old consumed by a primal, overwhelming fear, praying that whatever it was would just leave. Alex can't recall how long they stayed like that, frozen in terror. The next thing they remember, it was morning, and they were telling their story to one of the adults running the camp. The camp counselor listened with a serious expression, and after Alex was done, they looked at the 2 other women in the office with them. Their faces were disturbed, almost scared. One of the women looked back at Alex and said, "That's so creepy. That sounds exactly like Miss Graham." Alex's heart skipped a beat, and a chill that had nothing to do with the cool morning air ran down their spine. To this day, Alex doesn't know what they saw. Was it a real person playing a truly messed up prank? Was it just a trick of their exhausted 13-year-old mind? Or, by some chilling and unsettling chance, was it Miss Graham out there, still watching over the campground she had died on?